Section 95 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alan Murphy. The World Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 95, Daniel the Fearless, from the Old Testament, 6th century BC. Daniel in the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Devorah in the province of Babylon. Footnote: the cubit of the Hebrews was about 17.5 inches. End of footnote. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image that thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made, well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 17 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake, and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth, and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Daniel in the den of lions. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault. Forasmuch as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Then said these men, We shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king, and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree, and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed, and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled, and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they came near, and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king, That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace, and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions had the mastery of them, and brake all their bones in pieces, or ever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree, that in every domain of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast for ever. And his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. End of section 95. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ellen Murphy.
Section 96 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine, read for LibriVox.org by Sandra Schmidt. Belshazzar, 538 BC, by Heinrich Heine. Midnight came slowly sweeping on, in silent rest lay Babylon. But in the royal castle high, red torches gleam and courtiers cry. Belshazzar there in kingly hall is holding kingly festival. The vessels sat in glittering line and emptied the goblets with glowing wine. The goblets rattle, the choruses swell, and it pleased the stiff-necked monarch well. In the monarch's cheeks a wild fire glowed, and the wine awoke his daring mood. And onward still by his madness spurred, he blasphemes the Lord with a sinful word. And he brazenly boasts, blaspheming wild, while the servile courtiers cheered and smiled. Quick the king spoke, while his proud glance burned, quickly the servant went and returned. He bore on his head the vessels of gold, of Jehovah's temple the plunder bold. With daring hand, in his frenzy grim, the king seized the beaker and filled to the brim, and drained to the dregs the sacred cup, and foaming he cried as he drank it up, Jehovah, eternal scorn I own to thee, I am monarch of Babylon. Scarce had the terrible blasphemy rolled from his lips, ere the monarch at heart was cold. The yelling laughter was hushed, and all was still as death in the royal hall. And see on the white wall high, the form of a hand went slowly by, and wrote on the broad wall white letters of fire, and vanished in night. Pale as death, with a steady stare, and with trembling knees, the king sat there. The horde of slaves sat shuddering chill, no word they spoke, but were deathlike still. The magians came, but of them all none could read the flame script on the wall. But that same night, in all his pride, by the hands of his servants, Belshazzar died. End of section 96. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 97 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World's Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 97. The Fall of Babylon by Jacob Abbott, 558 BC. The kingdom of the Medes and Persians, lying to the east of Mesopotamia, had been increasing in power so rapidly that the rulers of Lydia and of Babylonia became alarmed and formed a league against it. Cyrus, the Persian king, first overpowered Lydia and then attacked the Babylonian king. In 538 BC, Babylon fell into the hands of the Persians. The Editor. In his advance toward the dominions of Croesus in Asia Minor, Cyrus had passed to the northward of the great and celebrated city of Babylon. Babylon was on the Euphrates, toward the southern part of Asia. It was the capital of a large and very fertile region, which extended on both sides of the Euphrates toward the Persian Gulf. The limits of the country, however, which was subject to Babylon, varied very much at different times, as they were extended or contracted by revolutions and wars. The river Euphrates was the great source of fertility for the whole region through which it flowed. The country watered by this river was very densely populated, and the inhabitants were industrious and peaceable, cultivating their land and living quietly and happily on its fruits. The surface was intersected with canals, which the people had made for conveying the water of the river over the land for the purpose of irrigating it. Some of these canals were navigable. There was one great trunk which passed from the Euphrates to the Tigris, supplying many minor canals by the way that was navigable for vessels of considerable burden. The traffic of the country was, however, mainly conducted by means of boats of moderate size, the construction of which seemed to Herodotus very curious and remarkable. The city was enormously large and required immense supplies of food, which were brought down in these boats from the agricultural country above. The boats were made in the following manner. First, a frame was built of the shape of the intended boat, broad and shallow, and with the stem and stern of the same form. This frame was made of willows, like a basket, and when finished was covered with a sheathing of skins. A layer of reeds was then spread over the bottom of the boat to protect the frame and to distribute evenly the pressure of the cargo. The boat thus finished was laden with the produce of the country, and was then floated down the river to Babylon. In this navigation, the boatmen were careful to protect the leather sheathing from injury by avoiding all contact with rocks or even with the gravel of the shores. They kept their craft in the middle of the stream by means of 2 oars, or rather an oar and a paddle, which were worked, the first at the bows and the second at the stern. The advance of the boat was in some measure accelerated by these boatmen, though their main function was to steer their vessel by keeping it out of eddies and away from projecting points of land, and directing its course to those parts of the stream where the current was swiftest, and where it consequently be borne forward most rapidly to its destination. These boats were generally of very considerable size, and they carried, in addition to their cargo and crew, 1 or more beasts of burden, generally asses or mules. These animals were allowed the pleasure, if any pleasure it was to them, of sailing thus idly down the stream, for the sake of having them at hand at the end of the voyage to carry back again up the country the skins, which constituted the most valuable portion of the craft they sailed in. It was found that these skins, if carefully preserved, would be easily transported up the river and would answer the purpose of a second voyage. Accordingly, when the boats arrived at Babylon, the cargo was sold. The boats were broken up, the skins were folded into packs, and in this form the mules carried them up the river again, the boatmen driving the mules as they walked by their side. Babylon was a city of immense extent and magnitude. In fact, the accounts given of the space which it covered have often been considered incredible. These accounts make the space which was included within the walls 4 or 5 times as large as London. A great deal of this space, however, was occupied by parks and gardens connected with the royal palaces, and by open squares. Then, besides, the houses occupied by the common people in the ancient cities were of fewer stories in height, and consequently more extended on the ground, than those built in modern times. In fact, it is probable that in many instances they were mere ranges of huts and hovels, as in the case indeed to a considerable extent in Oriental cities at the present day, so that it is not at all impossible that even so large an area as 4 or 5 times the size of London may have been included within the fortifications of the city. In respect to the walls of the city, very extraordinary and apparently contradictory accounts are given by the various ancient authors who describe them. Some make them 75, and others 200 or 300 feet high. There have been many discussions in respect to the comparative credibility of these several statements, and some ingenious attempts have been made to reconcile them. It is not, however, at all surprising that there should be such a diversity in the dimensions given, for the walling of an ancient city was seldom of the same height in all places. The structure necessarily varied according to the nature of the ground, being high wherever the ground without was such as to give the enemy an advantage in an attack, and lower in other situations, where the conformation of the surface was such as to afford of itself a partial protection. It is not, perhaps, impossible that at some particular points, as for example across glens and ravines, or along steep declivities, the walls of Babylon may have been raised, even to the very extraordinary height which Herodotus ascribes to them. The walls were made of bricks, and the bricks were formed of clay and earth, which was dug from a trench made outside of the lines. This trench served the purpose of a ditch, to strengthen the fortification when the wall was completed. The water from the river, and from streams flowing toward the river, was admitted to these ditches on every side, and kept them always full. The sides of these ditches were lined with bricks too, which were made, like those of the walls, from the earth obtained from the excavations. They used for all this masonry a cement made from a species of bitumen, which was found in great quantities floating down one of the rivers, which flowed into the Euphrates in the neighborhood of Babylon. The river Euphrates itself flowed through the city. There was a breastwork or low wall along the banks of it on either side, with openings at the terminations of the streets leading to the water, and flights of steps to go down. These openings were secured by gates of brass, which, when closed, would prevent an enemy from gaining access to the city from the river. The great streets which terminated thus at the river on one side extended to the walls of the city on the other, and they were crossed by other streets at right angles to them. In the outer walls of the city, at the extremities of all these streets, were massive gates of brass, with hinges and frames of the same metal. There were 100 of these gates in all. They were guarded by watchtowers on the walls above. The watchtowers were built on both the inner and outer faces of the wall, and the wall itself was so broad that there was room between these watchtowers for a chariot, and for to drive and turn. The river, of course, divided the city into 2 parts. The king's palace was in the center of one of these divisions, within a vast circular enclosure, which contained the palace buildings, together with spacious courts and parks and gardens pertaining to them. In the center of the other division was a corresponding enclosure, which contained the great temple of Belus. Here there was a very lofty tower, divided into 8 separate towers, one above the other, with a winding staircase to ascend to the summit. In the upper story was a sort of chapel, with a couch and a table and other furniture for use in the sacred ceremonies, all of gold. Above this On the highest platform of all was a grand observatory where the Babylonian astrologers made their celestial observations. There was a bridge across the river connecting one section of the city with the other, and it is said that there was a subterranean passage under the river also, which was used as a private communication between two public edifices, palaces or citadels, which were situated near the extremities of the bridge. All these constructions were of the most grand and imposing character. In addition to the architectural magnificence of these buildings, the gates and walls were embellished with a great variety of sculptures, images of animals of every form and in every attitude, and men, single and in groups, models of great sovereigns, and representations of hunting scenes, battle scenes, and great events in the Babylonian history. The most remarkable, however, of all the wonders of Babylon, though perhaps not built till after Cyrus's time, were what were called the Hanging Gardens. Although called the Hanging Gardens, they were not suspended in any manner, as the name might denote, but were supported upon arches and walls. The arches and walls sustained a succession of terraces rising one above another, with broad flights of steps for ascending to them, and on these terraces the gardens were made. The upper terrace, or platform, was several hundred feet from the ground, so high that it was necessary to build arches upon arches within, in order to attain the requisite elevation. The lateral thrust of these arches was sustained by a wall 25 feet in thickness, which surrounded the garden on all sides, and rose as high as the lowermost tier of arches, upon which would, of course, be concentrated the pressure and weight of all the pile. The whole structure thus formed a sort of artificial hill, square in form, and rising in a succession of terraces to a broad and level area upon the top. The extent of this grand square upon the summit was 400 feet upon each side. The surface which served as the foundation for the gardens that adorned these successive terraces, and the area above, was formed in the following manner. Over the masonry of the arches there was laid a pavement of broad, flat stones, 16 feet long and 4 feet wide. Over these there was placed a stratum of reeds laid in bitumen, and above them another flooring of bricks cemented closely together, so as to be impervious to water. To make the security complete in this respect, the upper surface of this brick flooring was covered with sheets of lead, overlapping each other in such a manner as to convey all the water which might percolate through the mold away to the sides of the garden. The earth and mold were placed upon this surface, thus prepared, and the stratum was so deep as to allow large trees to take root and grow in it. There was an engine constructed in the middle of the upper terrace, by which water could be drawn up from the river and distributed over every part of the vast pile. The gardens, thus completed, were filled to profusion with every species of tree and plant and vine which could produce fruit or flowers to enrich or adorn such a scene. Every country in communication with Babylon was made to contribute something to increase the endless variety of floral beauty which was here literally enthroned. Gardeners of great experience and skill were constantly employed in cultivating the parterres, pruning the fruit trees and the vines, preserving the walks, and introducing new varieties of vegetation. In a word, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon became one of the wonders of the world. The country in the neighborhood of Babylon, extending from the river on either hand, was in general level and low, and subject to inundations. One of the sovereigns of the country, A queen named Nitocris had formed the grand design of constructing an immense lake to take off the superfluous water in case of a flood, and thus preventing an overflow. She also opened a great number of lateral and winding channels for the river, wherever the natural disposition of the surface afforded facilities for doing so, and the earth which was taken out in the course of these excavations was employed in raising the banks by artificial terraces, such as are made to confine the Mississippi at New Orleans, and are there called levees. Footnote: from the French word levee, raised. End footnote. The object of Nitocris in these measures was twofold. She wished, in the first place, to open all practicable channels for the flow of the water, and then to confine the current within the channels thus made. She also wished to make the navigation of the stream as intricate and complicated as possible, so that while the natives of the country might easily find their way in boats to the capital, a foreign enemy, if he should make the attempt, might be confused and lost. These were the rivers of Babylon, on the banks of which the captive Jews sat down and wept when they remembered Zion. The Queen Nitocris seems to have been quite distinguished for her engineering and architectural plans. It was she that built the bridge across the Euphrates within the city, and as there was a feeling of jealousy and ill will, as usual in such a case, between the two divisions of the town which the river formed, she caused the bridge to be constructed with a movable platform or draw, by means of which the communication might be cut off at pleasure. This draw was generally up at night and down by day. Herodotus relates a curious anecdote of this queen, which, if true, evinces in another way the peculiar originality of mind and the ingenuity which characterized all her operations. She caused her tomb to be built before her death over one of the principal gates of the city. Upon the facade of this monument was a very conspicuous inscription to this effect: "If any one of the sovereigns, my successors, shall be in extreme want of money, let him open my tomb and take what he may think proper, but let him not resort to this resource unless the urgency is extreme." The tomb remained for some time after the queen's death quite undisturbed. In fact, the people of the city avoided this gate altogether, on account of the dead body deposited above it, and the spot became well nigh deserted. At length, in process of time, a subsequent sovereign, being in want of money, ventured to open the tomb. He found, however, no money within. The gloomy vault contained nothing but the dead body of the queen, and a label with this inscription: "If your avarice were not as insatiable as it is base, you would not have intruded on the repose of the dead." It was not surprising that Cyrus, having been so successful in his enterprises thus far, should now begin to turn his thoughts toward this great Babylonian empire, and to feel a desire to bring it under his sway. The first thing, however, was to confirm and secure his Lydian conquests. He spent some time, therefore, in organizing and arranging at Sardis the affairs of the new government, which he was to substitute for that of Croesus there. He designated certain portions of his army to be left for garrisons in the conquered cities. He appointed Persian officers, of course, to command these forces, but as he wished to conciliate the Lydians, he appointed many of the municipal and civil officers of the country from among them. There would appear to be no danger in doing this, as by giving the command of the army to Persians, he retained all the real power directly in his own hands. One of these civil officers, the most important, in fact, of all, was the Grand Treasurer. To him Cyrus committed the charge of the stores of gold and silver which came into his possession at Sardis, and of the revenues which were afterward to accrue. Cyrus appointed a Lydian named Pactyas to this trust, hoping by such measures to conciliate the people of the country and to make them more ready to submit to his sway. Things being thus arranged, Cyrus, taking Croesus with him, set out with the main army to return toward the east. As soon as he had left Lydia, Pactyas excited the Lydians to revolt. The name of the commander-in-chief of the military forces which Cyrus had left was Tabillus. Pactyas abandoned the city and retired toward the coast, where he contrived to raise a large army, formed partly of Lydians and partly of bodies of foreign troops, which he was enabled to hire by means of the treasures which Cyrus had put under his charge. He then advanced to Sardis, took possession of the town, and shut up Tabillus with his Persian troops in the citadel. When the tidings of these events came to Cyrus, he was very much incensed, and determined to destroy the city. Croesus, however, interceded very earnestly in its behalf. He recommended that Cyrus, instead of burning Sardis, should send a sufficient force to disarm the population, and that he should then enact such laws and make such arrangements as should turn the minds of the people to habits of luxury and pleasure. By doing this, said Croesus, the people will in a short time become so enervated and so effeminate that you will have nothing to fear from them. Cyrus decided on adopting this plan. He dispatched a Median named Mezares, an officer of his army at the head of a strong force, with orders to go back to Sardis to deliver Tabillus from his danger, to seize and put to death all the leaders in the Lydian rebellion, excepting Pactyas. Pactyas was to be saved alive and sent a prisoner to Cyrus in Persia. Pactyas did not wait for the arrival of Mezares. As soon as he heard of his approach, he abandoned the ground and fled northwardly to the city of Syme and sought refuge there. When Mezares had reached Sardis and re-established the government of Cyrus there, he sent messages to Syme demanding the surrender of the fugitive. The people of Syme were uncertain whether they ought to comply. They said that they must first consult an oracle. It was a very ancient and celebrated oracle near Miletus, and they sent messengers to this oracle, demanding to know whether it were according to the will of the gods or not that the fugitive should be surrendered. The answer brought back was that they might surrender him. They were accordingly making arrangements for doing this when one of the citizens, a very prominent and influential man named Aristodicus, expressed himself not satisfied with the reply. He did not think it possible, he said, that the oracle could really counsel them to deliver up a helpless fugitive to his enemies. The messengers must have misunderstood or misreported the answer which they had received. He finally persuaded his countrymen to send a second embassy. He himself was placed at the head of it. On their arrival, Aristodicus addressed the oracle as follows: "To avoid a cruel death from the Persians, Pactyas, a Lydian, fled to us for refuge. The Persians demanded that we should surrender him. Much as we are afraid of their power, we are still more afraid to deliver up a helpless suppliant for protection, without clear and decided directions from you." The embassy received to this demand the same reply as before. Still, Aristodicus was not satisfied, and as if by way of bringing home to the oracle somewhat more forcibly a sense of the true character of such an action as it seemed to recommend, he began to make a circuit in the grove which was around the temple in which the oracle resided, and to rob and destroy the nests which the birds had built there, allured apparently by the sacred repose and quietude of the scene. This had the desired effect. A solemn voice was heard from the interior of the temple, saying in a warning tone, "Impious man, how dost thou dare to molest those who have placed themselves under my protection?" To this Aristodicus replied by asking the oracle how it was that it watched over and guarded those who sought its own protection, while it directed the people of Syene to abandon and betray suppliants for theirs. To this the oracle answered, "I direct them to do it, in order that such impious men may the sooner bring down upon their heads the judgments of heaven for having dared to entertain even the thought of delivering up a helpless fugitive." When this answer was reported to the people of Syene, they did not dare to give Pactyas up, nor on the other hand did they dare to incur the enmity of the Persians by retaining and protecting him. They accordingly sent him secretly away. The emissaries of Mezares, however, followed him. They kept constantly on his track, demanding him successively of every city where the hapless fugitive sought refuge, until at length, partly by threats and partly by a reward, they induced a certain city to surrender him. Mezares sent him a prisoner to Cyrus. Soon after this, Mezares himself died, and Harpagus was appointed governor of Lydia in his stead. In the meantime, Cyrus went on with his conquests in the heart of Asia, and at length, in the course of a few years, he had completed his arrangements and preparations for the attack on Babylon. He advanced at the head of a large force to the vicinity of the city. The king of Babylon, whose name was Belshazzar, withdrew within the walls, shut the gates, and felt perfectly secure. A simple wall was in those days a very effectual protection against any armed force whatever, if it was only high enough not to be scaled, and thick enough to resist the blows of a battering ram. The artillery of modern times would have speedily made a fatal breach in such structures, but there was nothing but the simple force of man, applied through brazen-headed beams of wood in those days, and Belshazzar knew well that his walls would bid all such modes of demolition a complete defiance. He stationed his soldiers, therefore, on the walls, and his sentinels in the watchtowers, while he himself and all the nobles of his court, feeling perfectly secure in their impregnable condition, and being abundantly supplied with all the means that the whole empire could furnish, both for sustenance and enjoyment, gave themselves up in their spacious palaces and gardens to gaiety, festivity, and pleasure. Cyrus advanced to the city. He stationed one large detachment of his troops at the opening in the main walls, where the river entered into the city, and another one below, where it issued from it. These detachments were ordered to march into the city by the bed of the river as soon as they should observe the water subsiding. He then employed a vast force of laborers to open new channels, and to widen and deepen those which had existed before, for the purpose of drawing off the waters from their usual bed. When these passages were thus prepared, the water was let into them one night, at a time previously designated, and it soon ceased to flow through the city. The detachments of soldiers marched in over the bed of the stream, carrying with them vast numbers of ladders. With these they easily scaled the low walls which lined the banks of the river, and Belshazzar was thunderstruck. With the announcement made to him in the midst of one of his feasts that the Persians were in complete and full possession of the city. End of section 97. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 98 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine, read for LibriVox.org. Palestine Part I, in Old Testament times. Historical note. 15 or 16 centuries before Christ, Palestine was commonly known as the land of Canaan, and the people were called Canaanites. Into this country the Hebrews, after their deliverance from bondage in Egypt, forced their way, and about 1050 BC the Hebrew kingdom was formed under Saul, who was succeeded by David and Solomon. This unity endured for little more than a century. Then the kingdom was divided. The northern kingdom was overcome by Assyria in the 8th century before Christ, and the southern fell into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in the 6th. Palestine was then ruled in turn by Persia, Macedonia, Egypt, and Syria. Antiochus IV of Syria did his best to destroy the Jewish religion. This brought about a war for independence, which resulted in Judea's gaining control of southern Palestine from the Jordan to the sea. End of section 98. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 99 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tally Haas. The World's Story, Volume 2. India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 99. The Journey to the Promised Land. 13th century BC. And Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord, as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, and their kneading troughs, being bound upon their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot, that were men besides children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough, which they brought forth out of Egypt. For it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt, and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victuals. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer, for God said, Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly warned the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth, and encamped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it shall ye camp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them, and I be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. The passage across the Red Sea. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with a high hand. And the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes and beheld the Egyptians marching after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And behold, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of cloud, and troubled the hosts of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily. So that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the hosts of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did unto the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. God gives the 10 Commandments. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the 3rd day. For the 3rd day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds upon the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up into the mountain, or touch the border of it. Whoever toucheth the mountain shall be surely put to death. There shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up to the mountain. And Moses went down from the mountain unto the people, and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, Be ready against the third day. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at neither part of the mountain. And Mount Sinai was altogether in a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And let the priests also, which come near to the Lord, sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. And Moses said unto the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for thou charged us, saying, Set bounds about the mountain, and sanctify it. And the Lord said unto him, Away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. So Moses went down unto the people, and spake unto them. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heavens above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and hallowed it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. And all the people saw the thundering, and the lightning, and the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before thy faces, that ye sin not. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. The worship of the golden calf. And Moses went up into the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and got him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And when the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we want not what is become of him. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool, after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation, and said, Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow, and offered burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and rose up to play. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go, get thee down, for thy people which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. And Moses besought the Lord his God, and said, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, For mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn aside from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swarest by thine own self, and said unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, There is a noise of war in the camp. And he said, It is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. And it came to pass, as soon as he came nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf, and the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hands, and brake them beneath the mount. And he took the calf which they had made, and burnt it in the fire, and ground it to powder, and strewed it upon the waters, and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said unto Aaron, What did this people unto thee, that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, Let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. Thou knowest the people, that they are set on mischief. For they said unto me, Make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we want not what is become of him. And I said unto them, Whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me. Then I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf. And Moses stood in the gate of the camp, and said, Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And he said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. For Moses had said, Consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, even every man upon his son and upon his brother, that he may bestow upon you a blessing this day. And it came to pass, on the morrow, that Moses said unto the people, Ye have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin. And Moses returned unto the Lord, and said, Oh, this people have sinned a great sin, and have made them gods of gold. Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sins, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book, which thou hast written. And the Lord said unto Moses, Whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. Therefore now go, lead the people into the land of which I have spoken unto thee. Behold, mine angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless, in the day when I will visit their sins upon them. And the Lord plagued the people, because they made the calf which Aaron made. The building of the tabernacle. And Moses spake unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord commanded, saying, Take ye from among you an offering unto the Lord. Whosoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it, an offering of the Lord, gold and silver, and brass, and blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine linen, and goat's hair, and ram's skins dyed red, and badger's skins, and shittim wood, and oil for the light, and spices for an anointing oil, and for sweet incense, and onyx stones, and stones to be set for the ephod, and for the breastplate. And every wise-hearted among you shall come and make all that the Lord hath commanded, the tabernacle, his tent, and his covering, his taches, and his boards, his bars, his pillars, and his sockets, the ark, and the staves thereof, with the mercy seat, and the veil of the covering, the table, and his staves, and all his vessels, and the showbread, the candlestick also for the light, and the furniture, and his lamps with the oil for the light, and the incense altar, and his staves, and the anointing oil, and the sweet incense, and the hanging for the door at the entering in of the tabernacle, the altar of the burnt offering, with his brassen grate, his staves, and all his vessels, the laver and his foot, the hangings of the court, his pillars, and their sockets, and the hanging for the door of the court, the pins of the tabernacle, and the pins of the court, and their cords, the clothes of service, to do service in the holy place, the holy garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments for his sons, to minister in the priest's office. And all the congregation of the children of Israel departed from the presence of Moses, and they came every one whose heart stirred him up, and every one whom his spirit made him willing. And they brought the Lord's offering to the work of the tabernacle of the congregation, and for all his service, and for the holy garments. And they came, both men and women, as they were willing-hearted, and brought bracelets, and earrings, and rings, and tablets, all jewels of gold. And every man that offered an offering of gold unto the Lord. And every man with whom was found blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine linen, and goat's hair, and red skins of rams, and badgers' skins, brought them. Every one that did offer an offering of silver and brass brought the Lord's offering, and every man with whom was found shittim wood, any work of the service, brought it. And all the women that were wise-hearted did spin with their hands, and brought that which they had spun, both of blue, and of purple, and of scarlet, and of fine linen. And all the women whose hearts stirred them up in wisdom spun goat's hair. And the rulers brought onyx stones, and stones to be set for the ephod, and for the breastplate, and spices, and oil for the light, and for the anointing oil, and for the sweet incense. The children of Israel brought a willing offering unto the Lord, every man and woman whose heart made him willing to bring for all the manner of work which the Lord had commanded to be made by the hand of Moses. And Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord hath called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he hath filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship, and to devise curious works, to work in gold, and in silver, in brass, and in cutting of stones, to set them in carvings of wood, to make any manner of cunning work. And he hath put in his heart that he may teach, both he and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. Them hath he filled with wisdom of heart, to work all manner of work of the engraver, and of the cunning workman, and of the embroiderer in blue and in purple, in scarlet and in fine linen, and of the weaver, even of them that do any work, and of those that devise cunning work. Then brought Bezalel and Aholiab, and every wise-hearted man in whom the Lord put wisdom and understanding, to know how to work all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary, according to all that the Lord had commanded. And Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every wise-hearted man, in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom, even every one whose heart stirred him up to come unto the work to do it. And they received of Moses all the offering which the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of the sanctuary, to make it withal. And they brought yet unto him free offerings every morning. And all the wise men that wrought all the work of the sanctuary came every man from his work which they made. And they spake unto Moses, saying, The people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded to make. And Moses gave command that they cause it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, Let neither man nor woman take any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing. For the stuff they had was sufficient for all the work to make it, and too much. According to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so the children of Israel made all the work. And Moses did look upon all the work, and behold, they had done it, as the Lord had commanded, even so had they done it. And Moses blessed them. And Moses reared up the tabernacle, and fastened his sockets, and set up the boards thereof, and put in the bars thereof, and reared up his pillars. And he spread abroad the tent over the tabernacle, and put the covering of the tent above upon it, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he took and put the testimony into the ark, and set the staves on the ark, and put the mercy seat above upon the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle, and set up the veil of the covering, and covered the ark of the testimony, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he put the table in the tent of the congregation, upon the side of the tabernacle northward, without the veil. And he set the bread in order upon it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And he put the candlestick in the tent of the congregation, over against the table, on the side of the tabernacle southward. And he lighted the lamps before the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he put the golden altar in the tent of the congregation before the veil. And he burnt sweet incense thereon, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he set up the hangings at the door of the tabernacle. And he put the altar of burnt offering by the door of the tabernacle of the tent of congregation, and offered upon it the burnt offerings and the meat offerings, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he set the laver between the tent of the congregation and the altar, and put water there to wash withal. And Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet thereat, when they went into the tent of the congregation, and when they came near unto the altar, they washed, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he reared up the court round about the tabernacle, and the altar, and set up the hangings of the court gate. So Moses finished the work. Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter into the tent of the congregation, because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud were not taken up, then they journeyed not till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel, throughout all their journeys. The death of Moses. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, unto the utmost sea, and the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, unto Zoar. And the Lord said unto him, This is the land which I swore unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth-peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face in all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land, and in all that mighty band, and in all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel. End of section 99. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tally Haas. Section 100 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tally Haas. The World's Story, Volume 2. India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 100. The Shepherd Boy Who Became King. 11th century BC. David plays on the harp before Saul. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on the harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hands, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants, and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp, and played with his hands. So Saul was refreshed, and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. David kills the giant Goliath of Gath. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Yaelh, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Footnote, about 9 feet 6 inches. End footnote. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. Footnote. A Hebrew shekel was equal to about half an ounce. End footnote. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? Choose ye a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of Jesse, and he had 8 sons. The man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And David was the youngest. And the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of the 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul, and they, and all the men of Israel, were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hands of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why comest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down, that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. And thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said moreover, The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until thou come to the valley, and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistine fell down by the way. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Saul's jealousy and Jonathan's affection. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan, son of Saul, was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed to David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hands, as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. David's escape from Saul. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore, I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee. And what I see, that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee-ward very good. For he did put his life in his hands, and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan. And Saul swore, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence, as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out, and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter. And they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with his javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house, to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image, and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed, with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. The friendship of Jonathan. And it was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is in Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David. And David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is mine iniquity? What is my sin before thy father, that he seekest my life? And he said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. My father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And David sware moreover, and said, Thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. Then said Jonathan unto David, Whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field, unto the 3rd day at even. If thy father at all misses me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me, that he might run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he say thus, It is well, thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very wroth, then be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore thou shalt deal kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant into a covenant of the Lord with thee. Notwithstanding, if there be in me iniquity, slay me thyself. For why shouldest thou bring me to thy father? And Jonathan said, Far be it from thee. For if I knew certainly that evil were determined by my father to come upon thee, then would not I tell it thee? Then said David to Jonathan, Who shall tell me? Or what if thy father answer thee roughly? And Jonathan said unto David, Come, and let us go out into the field. And they went out, both of them, into the field. And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow any time, or the third day, and behold, if there be good toward David, and then send I not unto thee, and show it thee, the Lord do so and more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do evil, then I will show it thee, and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace. And the Lord be with thee, as he hath been with my father. And thou shalt not only while yet I live show me the kindness of the Lord, that I die not, but also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, Let the Lord even require it at the hands of David's enemies. And Jonathan caused David to swear again, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. And Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly, and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Availle. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shoot at a mark. And behold, I will send a lad, saying, Go, find out the arrows. If I expressly say unto the lad, Behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them, then come unto me. For there is peace to thee, and not hurt, as the Lord liveth. But if I say thus unto the young man, Behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. And as touching the matter which thou and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord be between thee and me forever. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat him down to eat meat. And the king sat upon his seat, as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, Something has befallen him. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, Let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not unto the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. And Jonathan answered Saul his father, and said unto him, Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him. And he said unto his lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad, and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? And Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed, haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows, and came to his master. But the lad knew not anything, only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his artillery unto his lad, and said unto him, Go, carry them to the city. And as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times. And they kissed one another, and wept one with another, until David exceeded. And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. End of section 100. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tally Haas.
Section 101 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Farnood. The World's Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 101. The Story of King Solomon, 10th century BC. Solomon's Choice. Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayst prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself, that the Lord may continue his word which he spake concerning me, saying, If thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. So David slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. Then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and burnt incense in high places, and the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there. For that was the great high place. 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon that altar. In Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, Ask what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, Thou hast shewed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth, and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne. And it is this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in, and thy servant is in the midst of thy people which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings, and offered peace offerings, and made a feast to all his servants. A wise judge. Then came there 2 women unto the king, and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night, because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight, and took my son from beside me, while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom. and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. Then said the king, The one says, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other says, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one, and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. Solomon builds a house for the Lord. And Hiram king of Tyre sent her servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king in the room of his father. For Hiram was ever a lover of David. And Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, Thou knowest how that David my father could not build an house unto the name of the Lord his God for the wars which were about him on every side, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God hath given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrent. And behold, I purpose to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spake unto David my father, saying, Thy son, whom I will set upon thy throne in thy room, he shall build a house unto my name. Now therefore command thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, and my servants shall be with thy servant, and unto thee will I give hire for thy servants according to all that thou shalt appoint. For thou knowest that there is not among us any that can skill to hew timber like unto the Sidonians. And it came to pass, when Hiram heard the words of Solomon, that he rejoiced greatly, and said, Blessed be the Lord this day, which hath given unto David a wise son over this great people. And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have considered the things which thou sentest to me for, and I will do all thy desire concerning timber of cedar, and concerning timber of fir. My servants shall bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea, and I will convey them by sea in floats unto the place that thou shalt appoint me, and will cause them to be discharged there, and thou shalt receive them, and thou shalt accomplish my desire in giving food for my household. So Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire, and Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 measures of wheat for food to his household, and 20 measures of pure oil. Thus gave Solomon to Hiram year by year. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and they two made a league together. And King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel, and the levy was 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was over the levy. And Solomon had 70,000 that bare burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains, beside the chief of Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought in the work. And the king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and huge stones, to lay the foundation of the house. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them, and the stone squarers. So they prepared timber and stones to build the house. And the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, Concerning this house which thou art in building, if thou wilt walk in my statutes, and execute my judgment, and keep all my commandments to walk in them, then will I perform my word with thee, which I spake unto David thy father, and will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house, and finished it. And he built the walls of the house within with boards of cedar, both the floor of the house and the walls of the ceiling. And he covered them on the inside with wood, and covered the floor of the house with planks of fir. And he built 20 cubits on the sides of the house, both the floor and the walls with boards of cedar. He even built them for it within, even for the oracle, even for the most holy place. And the house, that is, the temple before it, was 40 cubits long, and the cedar of the house within was carved with knobs and open flowers. All was cedar, there was no stone seen. And the oracle he prepared in the house within, to set there the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in the height thereof. And he overlaid it with pure gold, and so covered the altar which was of cedar. So Solomon overlaid the house within with pure gold, and he made a partition by the chains of gold before the oracle, and he overlaid it with gold. And the whole house he overlaid with gold until he had finished all the house. Also the whole altar that was by the oracles he overlaid with gold. And within the oracle he made 2 cherubim of olive tree, each 10 cubits high, and 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the uttermost part of the one wing unto the uttermost part of the other were 10 cubits, and the other cherub was 10 cubits. Both the cherubims were of one measure and one size. The height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was it of the other cherub. And he set the cherubim within the inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubim, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall. And their wings touched one another in the midst of the house. And he overlaid the cherubim with gold, and he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubim and palm trees and open flowers within and without. And the floor of the house he overlaid with gold within and without. And for the entering of the oracle he made doors of olive tree. The lintel and side posts were a fifth part of the wall. The 2 doors also were of olive tree, and he carved upon them carvings of cherubim and palm trees and open flowers, and overlaid them with gold, and spread gold upon the cherubim and upon the palm trees. So also made he for the doors of the temple posts of olive tree, a 4th part of the wall. And the 2 doors were of fir tree. The 2 leaves of the one door were folding, and the 2 leaves of the other door were folding. And he carved thereon cherubim and palm trees and open flowers, and covered them with gold fitted upon the carved work. And he built the inner court with 3 rows of hewed stone, and a row of cedar beams. In the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid, in the month Ziv. And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So was he 7 years in building it. The Queen of Sheba visits Solomon. When the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up unto the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, It was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it, and behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceeds the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighteth in thee, and to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel for ever. Therefore made he thee king to do judgment and justice. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold. And a footnote, a talent of the Hebrews was equal to about $2,000. End of footnote. Spices, very great stores, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. And the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house harps also, and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were seen unto this day. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, besides that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. Some of the Proverbs of Solomon. The tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. The blessing of the Lord it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. He that despiseth his neighbor sinneth, but he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he. In the fear of the Lord is a strong confidence, and his children shall have a place of refuge. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but he that is of a merry heart hath a continual feast. Better is little with the fear of the Lord, than great treasure and trouble therewith. A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Pleasant words are as an honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh the city. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him. A man that hath friends must shew himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. He that hath pity upon the poor lendeth unto the Lord, and that which he hath given will he pay him again. Even a child is known by his doings, whether his work be pure, and whether it be right. Whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but shall not be heard. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. He that oppresseth the poor to increase his riches, and he that giveth to the rich shall surely come to want. Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings, he shall not stand before mean men. Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me, I will render to the man according to his work. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it shall return upon him. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. Thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not, neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity, for better is a neighbor that is near than a brother far off. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. End of section 101. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Farnood.
Section 102 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World's Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine, edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 102. Stories from the Talmud. The Talmud, or Instruction, is a famous compilation of the traditional ceremonial laws of the Jews and of the rabbinical discussions thereon. Mingled with these are stories, bits of history and folklore, allegories and parables. The editor. Proving a claim. A citizen of Jerusalem, travelling through the country, was taken very sick at an inn. Feeling that he would not recover, he sent for the landlord and said to him, "I am going the way of all flesh. If, after my death, any party should come from Jerusalem and claim my effects, do not deliver them until he shall prove to thee by 3 wise acts that he is entitled to them. For I charged my son before starting on my way, that if death befell me, he would be obliged to prove his wisdom before obtaining my possessions." The man died and was buried according to Jewish rites, and his death was made public, that his heirs might appear. When his son learned of his father's decease, he started from Jerusalem for the place where he had died. Near the gates of the city he met a man who had a load of wood for sale. This he purchased, and ordered it to be delivered at the inn towards which he was travelling. The man from whom he bought it went at once to the inn and said, "Here is the wood." "What wood?" returned the proprietor. "I ordered no wood." "No," answered the woodcutter, "but the man who follows me did. I will enter and wait for him." Thus the son had provided for himself a welcome when he should reach the inn, which was his first wise act. The landlord said to him, "Who art thou?" "The son of the merchant who died in thy house," he replied. They prepared for him a dinner, and placed upon the table 5 pigeons and a chicken. The master of the house, his wife, 2 sons and 2 daughters, sat with him at the table. "Serve the food," said the landlord. "Nay," answered the young man, "thou art master, it is thy privilege." "I desire thee to do this thing. Thou art my guest, the merchant's son. Pray, help the food." The young man, thus entreated, divided 1 pigeon between the sons, another between the 2 daughters, gave the 3rd to the man and his wife, and kept the other 2 for himself. This was his second wise act. The landlord looked somewhat perplexed at this mode of distribution, but said nothing. Then the merchant's son divided the chicken. He gave to the landlord and his wife the head, to the 2 sons the legs, to the 2 daughters the wings, and took the body for himself. This was his 3rd wise act. The landlord said, "Is this the way they do things in thy country? I noticed the manner in which thou didst apportion the pigeons, but said nothing. But the chicken, my dear sir, I must really ask thee thy meaning." Then the young man answered, "I told thee that it was not my place to serve thee. Nevertheless, when thou didst insist, I did the best I could, and I think I have succeeded. Thyself, thy wife, and 1 pigeon make 3. Thy 2 sons and 1 pigeon make 3. Thy 2 daughters and 1 pigeon make 3, and myself and 2 pigeons make 3 also. Therefore it is fairly done. As regards the chicken, I gave to thee and thy wife the head, because ye are the heads of the family. I gave to each of thy sons a leg, because they are the pillars of the family, preserving always the family name. I gave to each of thy daughters a wing, because in the natural course of events they will marry, take wing, and fly away from the home nest. I took the body of the chicken, because it looked like a ship, and in a ship I came here, and in a ship I hope to return. I am the son of the merchant who died in thy house. Give me the property of my dead father." "Take it and go," said the landlord, and giving him his father's possessions, the young man departed in peace. Nothing in the world without its use. David, king of Israel, was once lying upon his couch, and many thoughts were passing through his mind. "Of what use in the world is this spider?" thought he. "It but increases the dust and dirt of the world, making places unsightly and causing great annoyance." Then he thought of an insane man. "How unfortunate is such a being! I know that all things are ordained by God with reason and purpose, yet this is beyond my comprehension. Why should men be born idiots or grow insane?" Then the mosquitoes annoyed him, and the king thought, "What can the mosquito be good for? Why was it created in the world? It but disturbs our comfort, and the world profits not by its existence." Yet King David lived to discover that these very insects and the very condition of life, the being of which he deplored, were ordained even to his own benefit. When he fled before Saul, David was captured in the land of the Philistines by the brothers of Goliath, who carried him before the king of Gath, and it was only by pretending idiocy that he escaped death, the king deeming it impossible that such a man could be the kingly David, as it is written, "And he disguised his reason before their eyes, and played the madman in their hands, and scribbled on the doors of the gate." Upon another occasion, David hid himself in the cave of Adullam, and after he had entered the cave, it chanced that a spider spun a web over the opening thereto. His pursuers passed that way, but thinking that no one could have entered the cave protected by the spider's web without destroying it, they continued on their way. The mosquito also was of service to David when he entered the camp of Saul to secure the latter's weapon. While stooping near Abner, the sleeping man moved and placed his leg upon David's body. If he moved, he would awake Abner and meet with death. If he remained in that position, morning would dawn and bring him death. He knew not what to do. When a mosquito alighted upon Abner's leg, he moved it quickly, and David escaped. Therefore sang David, "All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like unto thee?" Trust in God. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Levi, fasted and prayed to the Lord that he might be permitted to gaze on the angel Elijah, he who had ascended alive to heaven. God granted his prayer, and in the semblance of a man Elijah appeared before him. "Let me journey with thee in thy travels through the world," prayed the rabbi to Elijah. "Let me observe thy doings, and gain in wisdom and understanding." "Nay," answered Elijah, "my actions thou couldst not understand. My doings would trouble thee, being beyond thy comprehension." But still the rabbi entreated. "I will neither trouble nor question thee," he said. "Only let me accompany thee on thy way." "Come then," said Elijah, "but let thy tongue be mute. With thy first question, thy first expression of astonishment, we must part company." So the two journeyed through the world together. They approached the house of a poor man, whose only treasure and means of support was a cow. As they came near, the man and his wife hastened to meet them, begged them to enter their cot, and eat and drink of the best they could afford, and to pass the night under their roof. This they did, receiving every attention from their poor but hospitable host and hostess. In the morning Elijah rose up early and prayed to God, and when he had finished his prayer, behold, the cow belonging to the poor people dropped dead. Then the travellers continued on their journey. Much was Rabbi Yochanan perplexed. Not only did we neglect to pay them for their hospitality and generous services, but his cow we have killed. And he said to Elijah, "Why didst thou kill the cow of this good man who—" "Peace," interrupted Elijah. "Hear, see, and be silent. If I answer thy questions, we must part." And they continued on their way together. Towards evening they arrived at a large and imposing mansion, the residence of a haughty and wealthy man. They were coldly received. A piece of bread and a glass of water were placed before them, but the master of the house did not welcome or speak to them, and they remained there during the night unnoticed. In the morning Elijah remarked that a wall of the house required repairing, and sending for a carpenter, he himself paid the money for the repair, as a return, he said, for the hospitality they had received. Again was Rabbi Yochanan filled with wonder, but he said naught, and they proceeded on their journey. As the shades of the night were falling, they entered a city which contained a large and imposing synagogue. As it was the time of the evening service, they entered and were much pleased with the rich adornments, the velvet cushions, and gilded carvings of the interior. After the completion of the service, Elijah arose and called out aloud, "Who is here willing to feed and lodge 2 poor men this night?" None answered, and no respect was shown to the travelling strangers. In the morning, however, Elijah re-entered the synagogue, and, shaking its members by the hands, he said, "I hope that you may all become presidents." Next evening the two entered another city, when the shamash, sexton, of the synagogue came to meet them, and notifying the members of his congregation of the coming of 2 strangers, the best hotel of the place was opened to them, and all vied in showing them attention and honor. In the morning, on parting with them, Elijah said, "May the Lord appoint over you but 1 president." Yochanan could resist his curiosity no longer. "Tell me," he said to Elijah, "tell me the meaning of all these actions which I have witnessed. To those who have treated us coldly, thou hast uttered good wishes. To those who have been gracious to us, thou hast made no suitable return. Even though we must part, I pray thee explain to me the meaning of thy acts." "Listen," said Elijah, "and learn to trust in God, even though thou canst not understand his ways. We first entered the house of the poor man, who treated us so kindly. Know that it had been decreed that on that very day his wife should die. I prayed unto the Lord that the cow might prove a redemption for her. God granted my prayers, and the woman was preserved unto her husband. The rich man, whom next we called up, treated us coldly, and I repaired his wall. I repaired it without a new foundation, without digging to the old one. Had he repaired it himself, he would have dug, and thus discovered a treasure, which lies there buried, but which is now forever lost to him. To the members of the synagogue who were inhospitable, I said, May you all be presidents, and where many rule there can be no peace. But to the others I said, May you have but one president. With one leader no misunderstanding may arise. Now, if thou seest the wicked prospering, be not envious. If thou seest the righteous in poverty and trouble, be not provoked or doubtful of God's justice. The Lord is righteous, his judgments are all true, his eyes note all mankind, and none can say, What dost thou? With these words Elijah disappeared, and Yochanan was left alone. Proverbs from the Talmud. To be patient is sometimes better than to have much wealth. The birds of the air despise a miser. Thy friend has a friend, and thy friend's friend has a friend. Be discreet. The wine belongs to the master, but the waiter receives the thanks. No man is impatient with his creditors. When wine enters the head, the secret flies out. Into the well which supplies thee with water, cast no stones. Say little and do much. He who is loved by man is loved by God. The sun will set without thy assistance. He who curbs his wrath merits forgiveness for his sins. The thief who finds no opportunity to steal considers himself an honest man. When the shepherd is angry with his flock, he appoints for its leader a blind bellwether. The man who sins is foolish as well as wicked. There is a great difference between one who can feel ashamed before his own soul and one who is only ashamed before his fellow man. End of section 102. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 103 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. The World Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 103. The Destruction of Jerusalem, 6th century BC, by Flavius Josephus, simplified by William Shepard. After Jehoiakim had been king for 4 years, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, marched against him with a great army, and threatened to destroy the country unless Jehoiakim would pay him a large sum of money every year. Jehoiakim was frightened, and agreed to do this. But the 3rd year afterwards he heard that Nebuchadnezzar was about to fight with the Egyptians, so he did not pay his tribute that year, hoping the Egyptians would be victorious. In vain did the prophet Jeremiah warn him against putting his trust in the Egyptians, and foretell that Jerusalem would be overthrown by the king of Babylon, who would take Jehoiakim captive. Jeremiah wrote down all his prophecies in a book, and read them to the people in the temple. When the rulers heard of this, they took the book from him and brought it to the king. And the king ordered that it should be read to him. But he was angry when he found what the book contained, and tore it up and threw it into the fire. Nebuchadnezzar came against the city, as the prophet had foretold, and took it, and slew the king, Jehoiakim, and made his son Jehoiachin king in his place. But afterwards Nebuchadnezzar repented of having put Jehoiachin on the throne, fearing that he would endeavor to avenge his father's death. So he displaced him, and made Zedekiah king instead, having first made him promise that he would always be faithful to him. Zedekiah was a brother of Jehoiakim. He was not a bad man naturally, but was weak, and could easily be persuaded to do evil. He allowed his courtiers and his people to sin against the laws of Moses, and he worshipped false gods himself. Jeremiah came often to him and warned him that if he did not leave off his transgressions, great calamities would fall upon him and his people, and the king of Babylon would destroy their cities and carry their people into bondage. And another prophet, named Ezekiel, also prophesied that God would punish him. Now Zedekiah did not believe these prophets, because, although they agreed in all other points, they seemed to disagree in one thing. For Jeremiah said that Zedekiah would be carried a captive to Babylon, while Ezekiel said that he would not see Babylon. So Zedekiah flattered himself that neither prophet spoke the truth. After Zedekiah had been king 8 years, he broke his promise to Nebuchadnezzar, and allied himself with the king of Egypt, who was fighting against Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar gathered up an army, and having defeated the Egyptians, marched against Jerusalem. The prophet Jeremiah had been thrown into prison by his enemies, but he did not cease to exhort the multitude to open their gates to the king of Babylon and trust to his mercy. For if they resisted, the city would surely be taken, and they would suffer the worst at the hands of their conquerors. Then his enemies came to Zedekiah and accused the prophet of giving evil counsel to the people, and they persuaded the king to deliver him into their hands. And they came into the prison and took him, and let him down into a pit full of mire, that he might be suffocated there. And he stood up to his neck in the mire, and would surely have perished if one of the king's servants had not obtained permission to draw him out again. For the king was so weak and good-natured that it was easy to make him change his mind. For 18 months Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem, and then the city could no longer hold out against him. And when Zedekiah saw that all was lost, he took his wives and his children and his captains and his friends, and with them fled out of Jerusalem by night. But at daybreak the Babylonians overtook the fugitives near Jericho, and they seized the king and his wives and children, but let the rest escape. So Zedekiah was brought before Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar reproached Zedekiah for having broken his promises to him who had made him ruler over Judea. Then he ordered the children of Zedekiah to be slain in the presence of their father, and he put out the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him, and carried him to Babylon. Thus the prophecies both of Jeremiah and of Ezekiel were fulfilled, for the king of Judea was brought captive to Babylon, yet he did not see that city. The general of Nebuchadnezzar's army was ordered to pillage the temple and the royal palace, and afterwards to set fire to them, and to overthrow the whole city to its foundations. And he did as he was told, so that not a stone remained in its place. He also carried away captive all the people of Jerusalem who were not slain, except a few poor of the land, who were left to work in the fields and vineyards. The gold and silver, and all the treasures of the temple and the royal palace were taken to Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar dedicated the holy vessels to the service of his own gods. And thus the kingdom of Judah came to an end. Nebuchadnezzar made a man named Gedaliah ruler over the handful of people who were left in Judea. He was a good man, and ruled justly. He took Jeremiah out of prison and treated him kindly, and suffered him to live in the city of Mizpah, as he wished to do. Now there were a certain number of the Jews who had fled from Jerusalem when it was taken. Hearing that the Babylonians had gone, they returned to their own country, and submitted to the rule of Gedaliah. But there was among them a man named Ishmael, who was of the royal family of David, and he determined to wrest the government from Gedaliah. So he came with 10 men to the house of Gedaliah, and Gedaliah, suspecting nothing, invited him and his men to dinner. But after they had eaten, they rose up and slew the governor, and Ishmael fled to the land of the Ammonites. The Jews were angry at what Ishmael had done, and were also greatly afraid, thinking that the king of Babylon would avenge the death of his governor. They came in their distress to Jeremiah, and asked him what they should do. Jeremiah advised them to remain in Judea, but though they had asked his counsel, they would not accept it after he had given it, and they all removed into Egypt, carrying Jeremiah with them. So the land of Judah was left desolate, and without any inhabitants. End of section 103. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 104 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. Jeremiah at the Fall of Jerusalem by Edward Friedrich Bindemann. Germany, 1811-1889. Painting, page 582. The prophet Jeremiah strove for 40 years to arouse the Jews to the fear of the Lord, but his only reward was abuse and imprisonment. In 586 B.C., they were overcome by the Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar, and the city was razed to the ground. Many of its people were taken to Babylon as captives. But Nebuchadnezzar had such respect for Jeremiah that he allowed the old prophet to go wherever he might choose. Jeremiah chose to remain among the ruins of his city. The Book of Lamentations is an expression of his grief at the fall of Jerusalem. It begins, "How doth the city stand solitary, that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations, and princes among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her, they are become her enemies. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction, and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen, she findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits." End of section 104. This recording is in the public domain. Section 105 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. Palestine Part II, a Roman province, historical note. During the last century before Christ, Pompey captured Jerusalem, and Palestine became a part of the Roman Empire. While Augustus was on the throne, in the most splendid period of Roman history, and during a time when, as Milton says, "no war or battle sound was heard the world around," Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. The Jews were by no means quiet under the rule of Rome, but their fierce rebellions were crushed by their conquerors, and Jerusalem was leveled with the ground. Hadrian rebuilt the city, but changed its name to Aelia Capitolina, and forbade that any Jew should make it his home. End of section 105. This recording is in the public domain. Section 106 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. The World Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 106. On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, by John Milton. This is the month, and this the happy morn, wherein the Son of Heaven's eternal King, of wedded maid and virgin mother born, our great redemption from above did bring. And so the holy sages once did sing, that he our deadly forfeit should release, and with his Father work us a perpetual peace. That glorious form, that life insufferable, and that far-beaming blaze of majesty, wherewith he wont at heaven's high council table to sit the midst of trinal unity, he laid aside, and here with us to be, forsook the courts of everlasting day, and chose with us a darksome house of mortal clay. Say, heavenly Muse, shall not thy sacred vein afford a present to the infant God? Hast thou no verse, no hymn, no solemn strain to welcome him to this his new abode, now while the heaven, by the sun's team untrod, hath took no print of the approaching light, and all the spangled hosts keep watch in squadrons bright? See how from far upon the eastern road the star-led wizards haste with odour sweet. Oh, run, prevent them with thy humble ode, and lay it lowly at his blessed feet. Have thou the honor first thy Lord to greet, And join thy voice unto the angel choir, From out his secret altar touched with hallowed fire. The Hymn. It was the winter wild, While the heaven-born child, All meanly wrapped in the rude manger lies. Nature in awe to him had doffed her gaudy trim, With her great Master so to sympathize. It was no season then for her To wanton with the sun, her lusty paramour. Only with speeches fair She woos the gentle air, To hide her guilty front with innocent snow, And on her naked shame Pollute with sinful blame The saintly veil of maiden white to throw. Confounded that her Maker's eyes Should look so near upon her foul deformities. But He, her fears to cease, Sent down the meek eyed Peace. She, crowned with olive green, Came swiftly sliding down through the turning sphere, His ready harbinger. With turtle wing the amorous clouds dividing, And waving wide her myrtle wand, She strikes a universal peace through sea and land. No war nor battle's sound Was heard the world around. The idle spear and shield were high uphung, And hooked chariot stood, unstained with hostile blood. The trumpet spake not to the armed throng. The kings sat still with awful eye, As if they surely knew their sovereign Lord was by. But peaceful was the night Wherein the Prince of Light His reign of peace upon the earth began. The winds with wonder whist, Smoothly the waters kissed, Whispering new joys to the mild ocean, Who now hath quite forgot to rave, While birds of calm sit brooding on the charmed wave. The stars with deep amaze Stand fixed in steadfast gaze, Bending one way with their precious influence, And will not take their flight For all the morning light, Or Lucifer that often warned them thence, But in their glimmering orbs did glow, Until their Lord himself bespake, and bid them go. And though the shady gloom Had given day her room, The sun himself withheld his wonted speed, And hid his head for shame, As his inferior flame The new enlightened world no more should need. He saw a greater sun appear Than his bright throne or burning axletree could bear. The shepherds on the lawn, Or ere the point of dawn, Sat simply chatting in a rustic row. Full little thought they than that the mighty Pan Was kindly come to live with them below. Perhaps their loves, or else their sheep, Was all that did their silly thoughts so busy keep. When such music sweet Their hearts and ears did greet, As never was by mortal finger strook, Divinely warbled voice answering the stringed noise, As all their souls in blissful rapture took. The air such pleasure loth to lose, With thousand echoes still prolongs each heavenly close. Nature, that heard such sound Beneath the hollow round Of Cynthia's seat, the airy region thrilling, Now was almost won to think her part was done, And that her reign had here its last fulfilling. She knew such harmony alone could hold All heaven and earth in happier union. At last surrounds their sight A globe of circular light, That with long beams the shamefaced night arrayed. The helmed cherubim, The sworded seraphim, Are seen in glittering ranks with wings displayed, Harping in loud and solemn choir, With unexpressive notes, to heaven's new born air. Such music, as 'tis said, Before was never made, But when of old the sons of morning sung, While the Creator great his constellations set, And the well balanced world on hinges hung, And cast the dark foundations deep, And bid the weltering waves their oozy channel keep. Ring out, ye crystal spheres! Once bless our human ears, If ye have power to touch our senses so, And let your silver chime Move in melodious time, And let the bass of heaven's deep organ blow, And with your ninefold harmony Make up full consort to the angelic symphony. For if such holy song enwrap our fancy long, Time will run back and fetch the age of gold, And speckled vanity will sicken soon and die, And leprous sin will melt from earthly mold, And hell itself will pass away, And leave her dolorous mansions to the peering day. Yea, truth and justice then will down return to men, the enamelled auras of the rainbow wearing, and mercy set between, throned in a celestial sheen, with radiant feet the tissued clouds down steering, and heaven as at some festival will open wide the gates of her high palace hall. But wisest fate says no, this must not yet be so. The babe lies yet in smiling infancy that on the bitter cross must redeem our loss, so both himself and us to glorify. Yet first to those ye chained in sleep the wakeful trump of doom must thunder through the deep, with such a horrid clang as on Mount Sinai rang, while the red fire and smouldering clouds outbreak. The aged earth, aghast with terror of that blast, shall from the surface to the centre shake, when at the world's last session the dreadful Judge in middle air shall spread his throne. And then at last our bliss full and perfect is, but now begins. For from this happy day the old dragon underground in straiter limits bound, not half so far casts his usurped sway, and wroth to see his kingdom fail, swinges and scaly horror of his folded tail. The oracles are dumb, no voice or hideous hum runs through the arched roof in words deceiving. Apollo from his shrine can no more divine, with hollow shriek the steep of Delphos leaving. No nightly trance or breathed spell inspires the pale-eyed priest from the prophetic cell. The lonely mountains o'er and the resounding shore, a voice of weeping is heard in loud lament from haunted spring and dale, edged with poplar pale. The parting genius is with sighing sent, with flower inwoven tresses torn, and nymphs in twilight shade of tangled thickets mourn. In consecrated earth and on the holy hearth, the Lars and Lemures moan with midnight plaint. In urns and altars round, a drear and dying sound affrights the flamens at their service quaint, and the chill marble seems to sweat, while each peculiar power foregoes his wonted seat. Peor and Baalim forsake their temples dim, with that twice battered god of Palestine, and Munad Ashtaroth, heaven's queen and mother both, now sits not girt with tapers' holy shine. The Libyc Hammon shrinks his horn. In vain the Tyrian maids their wounded Tammuz mourn. And sullen Moloch, fled, hath left in shadows dread his burning idol all of blackest hue. In vain with cymbals ring they call the grisly king. In dismal dance about the furnace blue the brutish gods of Nile, as fast Isis and Orus and the dog Anubis haste. Nor is Osiris seen in Memphian grove or green, trampling the unshowered grass with lowings loud. Nor can he be at rest within his sacred chest. Naught but profoundest hell can be his shroud. In vain with timbreled anthems dark the sable-stoled sorcerers bear his worship dark. He feels from Judah's land the dreadful infant's hand. The rays of Bethlehem blind his dusky eyne. Nor all the gods beside longer dare abide, not Typhon huge ending in snaky twine. Our babe, to show his godhead true, can in his swaddling bands control the damned crew. So when the sun is in bed, curtained with cloudy red, pillows his chin upon an orient wave, the flocking shadows pale troop to the infernal jail, each fettered ghost slips to his several grave. And the yellow-skirted fays fly after the night steeds, leaving their moon-loved maze. But see, the Virgin blest hath laid her babe to rest. Time as our tedious song should here have ending. Heaven's youngest teamed star hath fixed her polished car, her sleeping Lord with handmaid lamp attending, and all about the courtly stable bright harnessed angels sit in order serviceable. End of section 106.
Section 107 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. The World's Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine, edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 107. The Burning of the Temple, 70 A.D. by Flavius Josephus, simplified by William Shepard. The governors who were sent by the Romans to rule the province of Judea treated the people so harshly that they rebelled. During the reign of Vespasian, his son Titus was sent against them. After a long siege, Jerusalem was captured in 70 A.D. Titus had intended that the temple should be spared, but by the wanton act of a soldier it was burned. The Editor. In order to destroy as many of their enemies as possible, the Jews made use of a stratagem. Along the western cloisters they filled the space between the rafters and the ceiling with dry wood, bitumen, and pitch, and then, as if worn out, they retreated from the cloisters. On this, a number of Romans put up their scaling ladders and mounted to the roof, without waiting for orders. But the more prudent suspected that a trap had been laid for them, and did not follow their comrades. When the roof was filled with those who had clambered up, the Jews set fire to the whole range of cloisters from below. The flames rushed roaring upwards among the besiegers. They were thrown into a terrible fright. Some of them jumped down into the city, others into the very midst of the enemy. There they lay bruised to death, or with broken limbs. Most of them, in trying to escape, perished in the flames, while many fell upon their own swords when they saw that they could not save themselves. Titus, though very angry at all who had mounted the roof without waiting for orders, still was touched with pity when he beheld them burning up and dying before his eyes. He sprang forward and exhorted those around him to make every effort for their rescue, but nothing could be done to save them. A few of those who had mounted retired to a broader part of the roof, out of reach of the flames, but they were surrounded by the Jews and killed to a man, after having made a valiant resistance. Towards the close of the struggle, one of them, called Longus, was called upon by the Jews below, who said they would spare his life if he would come down and surrender. But his brother from among the Romans called out to him not to tarnish the honor of the family, or that of the Roman arms, by surrendering to the Jews. Longus then raised his sword in view of both armies, and stabbed himself to the heart. Among those who were entangled among the flames, one Artorius saved himself by his cunning. He called aloud to one of his fellow soldiers below, "I say, Lucius, I will leave you heir to my property if you will come near and catch me." Lucius ran up, and Artorius threw himself upon him, and was saved. But poor Lucius was dashed by the weight of his friend upon the pavement, and killed upon the spot. The Roman soldiers were much cast down in spirits by the death of so many of their comrades, but still it made them all the more cautious and wary against the wily stratagems of the Jews. As the western gallery or cloister had been destroyed, they themselves set fire to the northern one, and laid it in ashes as far as the northeast corner, which was built over the ravine called Kedron. In the meantime, the famine raged with such fierceness that countless thousands died of hunger. In every house where there was the least morsel of food, the inmates fought over it like dogs. The dearest friends fought for the most miserable little scraps. Gaping with hunger, the insurgents prowled about, and gnawed at anything that might seem like food. They chewed their belts and shoes, and tore off the leather from their shields. They ate up wisps of hay, and all sorts of nasty things, in fact, anything that might help to sustain life. When some of the mounds were finished, Titus ordered the battering rams to be brought up at the western wing of the inner temple. For 6 days before, the largest of the rams had battered against the wall without effect. A part of the army tried to undermine the foundations of the northern gate. After a great deal of labor, they at last rolled out the front stones, but the gate itself, supported by the inner stones, still remained firm, so that the Romans gave up trying to force an entrance to the temple in this manner, and instead fixed their scaling ladders to the galleries. The Jews allowed the Romans to mount, but as soon as they reached the top, they hurled them down headlong, or slew them before they could cover themselves with their shields. Several ladders filled with armed men coming up to the attack, they pushed aside from above, and thus hurled all the soldiers to the ground. all who had mounted fell by the swords of the Jews, and some of the Roman ensigns were captured. As Titus saw he could not force an entrance in this way, he ordered the gates to be set on fire. At this time, 2 of the insurgents belonging to Simon's bodyguard deserted to Titus. They hoped for pardon because they surrendered in a moment of success. Titus had a great mind to put them both to death, because he thought that they had only surrendered through necessity, to save themselves from that ruin which they had helped to bring upon their native city. However, as he had promised protection to all who came to him, he kept his word, and allowed the deserters to depart without punishment. The soldiers had already set the gates on fire, and the flames spread quickly to the galleries. When the Jews saw the circle of fire hem them in on every side, they lost courage, and stood gaping at the flames without trying to put them out. Through the whole day and the following night, the fire continued to burn the range of cloisters. The next morning, Titus gave orders that the fire should be put out and the gates thrown down, so as to admit the troops. He then called his generals together and held a council of war. Some of them wished to destroy the temple at once, because they said as long as the Jews had the temple to take refuge in, they would continue to be rebellious. Others advised that if the Jews would leave the temple at once, it should be spared, but if they would continue to fight from it as if it were a fortress, it should be burned to the ground. But Titus declared that whatever happened, so magnificent a work as the temple ought to be spared, because it would always be an ornament to the Roman Empire. 3 of his principal generals agreed with him in this view, and the council was dissolved. Some of the cohorts were immediately ordered to open a way through the ruins and put out the flames, while the rest of the army were allowed to repose, that they might be the more vigorous for action. Upon the next day, the Jews made a furious sally upon the guards who were posted in the outer court. The Romans closed up their ranks, locked their shields together in front like a wall, and bravely withstood the attack. But the Jews came pouring forth in such tremendous numbers that Titus was afraid the guards would be defeated, and hurried with his picked body of cavalry to assist them. The Jews could not withstand his charge, and retreated. But when he turned to go, they rallied and rushed again to the attack. The cavalry then charged, and the Jews were driven back, and shut up in the inner court of the temple. Titus then withdrew into Antonia, intending the next morning to make an attack with his entire force upon the temple. But the beautiful edifice was upon that day doomed to destruction. The fated day had come, the 10th of August, the very day on which the former temple had been destroyed by the king of Babylon. When Titus retired, the insurgents again charged the Romans. A conflict took place between the Jewish guards of the sanctuary and the Roman troops who were trying to put out the flames in the inner court. The Jews were routed and pursued even to the sanctuary. At this moment, a soldier, neither waiting for orders nor awed by so dread a deed, snatched up a burning brand, and lifted by one of his comrades, he threw the brand through a small golden door on the north side which opened onto the apartments around the sanctuary. As the flames caught, a fearful cry was raised by the Jews. They rushed to the rescue, caring nothing for their lives now that their temple was burning. Titus was lying down in his tent, when someone rushed in and told him that the temple was in flames. Starting up as he was, he at once ran to the spot in order to stop the flames. But there was such a noise and confusion that the soldiers either could not, or would not, hear the commands of their general, or heed the waving of his hand. Nothing could check the headlong fury of the soldiers. Many were trampled down by their own comrades about the entrances, and falling among the burning ruins of the outside galleries, they shared the fate of their enemies. Mad with rage, and pretending not to hear the orders of their general, the soldiers rushed on, and hurled their torches into the sanctuary. The insurgents now were helpless, and made no attempt at defense. On every side was slaughter and flight. Numbers of feeble and unarmed citizens were butchered. Around the altar were heaps of slain. Down its steps flowed a stream of blood which washed down the bodies that lay about. As Titus could not restrain the fury of his soldiers, he entered with some of his generals into the holy place of the sanctuary, and looked upon all the splendors that it contained. As the flames had not yet reached the interior, but were still feeding upon the apartments around the temple, Titus made one last effort to save the beautiful structure. He hurried out, and again exhorted the soldiers to put out the flames. At the same time, he ordered one of his centurions to beat with his staff those who would not obey him. But neither respect for their general nor fear of punishment could check the soldiers. The din of battle, their rage and hatred of the Jews, and hope of rich plunder, all combined to make the Romans ungovernable. For they saw that all about the temple was made of gold, and they believed that within it they would find immense treasures. Though Titus rushed out to restrain the soldiers, one even of those who had entered with him thrust fire amid the darkness between the hinges of the gate that opened into the inner temple. The whole building was in flames in an instant. Titus and his generals withdrew, and the beautiful building was left to its fate. End of section 107. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 108 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. Read for LibriVox.org by Sonia. Palestine Part III. The Crusades. Historical note. In 635, the Mohammedan Saracens gained possession of Palestine. They had no objection to the visits of pious pilgrims to Jerusalem, but after the capture of the land by the Seljukian Turks in the 11th century, these visits became a dangerous matter, for the pilgrims were robbed and tortured and sometimes put to death. The indignation aroused in Christian nations resulted in the Crusades. At first these were met with success, and what was called the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded. Less than a century later, however, the land was recaptured by the Saracen commander Saladin, and in the hands of the Mohammedans it has since remained. Among the Jews, however, the Zionist movement, a plan for their return to Palestine, is arousing much enthusiasm. This and the opening of the country to railroads give hope of progress and improvement. End of section 108. This recording is in the public domain. Section 109 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. The World's Story, Volume 2. India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 109. God Willeth It. 1095. By François-Pierre Guillaume Guizot. Hakim, Caliph of Egypt from 996 to 1021, persecuted the Christians, especially at Jerusalem, with all the violence of a fanatic and all the capriciousness of a despot. He ordered them to wear upon their necks a wooden cross 5 pounds in weight. He forbade them to ride on any animals but mules or asses, and without assigning any motive for his acts, he confiscated their goods and carried off their children. It was told to him one day that, when the Christians assembled in the temple at Jerusalem to celebrate Easter, the priests of the church rubbed balsam oil upon the iron chain which held up the lamp over the tomb of Christ, and afterwards set fire, from the roof, to the end of the chain. The fire stole down to the wick of the lamp, and lighted it. Then they shouted with admiration, as if fire from heaven had come down upon the tomb, and they glorified their faith. Hakim ordered the instant demolition of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it was accordingly demolished. Another time a dead dog had been laid at the door of a mosque, and the multitude accused the Christians of this insult. Hakim ordered them all to be put to death. The soldiers were preparing to execute the order, when a young Christian said to his friend, "It were too grievous that the whole church should perish. It were better that one should die for all. Only promise to bless my memory year by year." He proclaimed himself alone to blame for the insult, and was accordingly alone put to death. Meanwhile interest in the Holy Land was growing stronger every year. Rich and poor, nobles and peasants were making pilgrimages to Jerusalem, sometimes several thousand in a company. When they returned, often with their numbers sadly diminished, they had terrible tales to tell of the sufferings that they had undergone while trying to fulfill a pious duty. Matters grew worse and worse, for the most barbarous tribe of the Turks now ruled the Holy Land, and the savage cruelty shown to both pilgrims and Christian inhabitants became intolerable. The ardor of the Christians of the West was all ready to burst into flame. Peter the Hermit was the man who applied the torch. The Editor. Peter the Hermit, who was born in the neighborhood of Amiens about 1050, had gone, as so many others had, to Jerusalem to say his prayers there. Struck disconsolate at the sight of the sufferings and insults undergone by the Christians, he had an interview with Simeon, Patriarch of Jerusalem, who, recognizing in him a man of discretion and full of experience in affairs of the world, set before him in detail all the evils with which the people of God in the holy city were afflicted. "Holy Father," said Peter to him, "if the Roman Church and the princes of the West were informed, by a man of energy and worthy of belief, of all your calamities, of a surety they would essay to apply some remedy thereto by word and deed. Write then to our Lord the Pope, and to the Roman Church, and to the kings and princes of the West, and strengthen your written testimony by the authority of your seal. As for me, I shrink not from taking upon me a task for the salvation of my soul, and with the help of the Lord I am ready to go and seek out all of them, solicit them, show them the immensity of your troubles, and pray them all to hasten on the day of your relief." The patriarch eagerly accepted the pilgrim's offer, and Peter set out, going first of all to Rome, where he handed to Pope Urban II the patriarch's letters, and commenced in that quarter his mission of zeal. The Pope promised him not only support, but active cooperation when the propitious moment for it should arrive. Peter set to work, being still the pilgrim everywhere, in Europe as well as at Jerusalem. He was a man of very small stature, and his outside made but a very poor appearance. Yet superior power swayed this miserable body. He had a quick intellect and a penetrating eye, and he spoke with ease and fluency. "We saw him at that time," says his contemporary Guibert de Nogent, "scouring cities and town, and preaching everywhere. The people crowded round him, heaped presents upon him, and celebrated his sanctity by such great praises that I remember not that like honor was ever rendered to any other person. He displayed great generosity in the disposal of all things that were given to him. He restored wives to their husbands, not without the addition of gifts from himself, and he re-established, with marvelous authority, peace and good understanding between those who had been at variance. In all that he did or said, he seemed to have in him something divine, insomuch that people went so far as to pluck hairs from his mule to keep as relics. In the open air he wore a woolen tunic, and over it a serge cloak which came down to his heels. He had his arms and feet bare, he ate little or no bread, and lived chiefly on wine and fish. In 1095, after the preaching errantry of Peter the Hermit, Pope Urban II was at Clermont in Auvergne, presiding at the Grand Council, at which 13 archbishops and 205 bishops or abbots were met together, with so many princes and lay lords that, about the middle of the month of November, the towns and the villages of the neighborhood were full of people, and divers were constrained to have their tents and pavilions set up amidst the fields and meadows, notwithstanding that the season and the country were cold to an extreme. The first 9 sessions of the council were devoted to the affairs of the Church in the West, but at the 10th Jerusalem and the Christians of the East became the subject of deliberation. The Pope went out of the church wherein the council was assembled, and mounted a platform erected upon a vast open space in the midst of the throng. Peter the Hermit, standing at his side, spoke first, and told the story of his sojourn at Jerusalem, all he had seen of the miseries and humiliations of the Christians, and all he himself had suffered there. For he had been made to pay tribute for admission into the holy city, and for gazing upon the spectacle of the exactions, insults, and tortures he was recounting. After him, Pope Urban II spoke, in the French tongue no doubt as Peter had spoken, for he was himself a Frenchman, as the majority of those present were, grandees and populace. He made a long speech, entering upon the most painful details connected with the sufferings of the Christians of Jerusalem. That royal city which the Redeemer of the human race had made illustrious by his coming, had honored by his residence, had hallowed by his passion, had purchased by his death, had distinguished by his burial. She now demands of you her deliverance. Men of France, men from beyond the mountains, nations chosen and beloved of God, right valiant knights, recall the virtues of your ancestors, the virtue and greatness of King Charlemagne and your other kings. It is from you above all that Jerusalem awaits the help she invokes, for you above all nations God has vouchsafed signal glory in arms. Take ye then the road to Jerusalem for the remission of your sins, and depart assured of the imperishable glory which awaits you in the kingdom of heaven. From the midst of the throng arose one prolonged and general shout, God willeth it! God willeth it! The Pope paused for a moment, and then making a sign with his hand as if to ask for silence, he continued, If the Lord God were not in your souls, ye would not all have uttered the same words. In the battle, then, be those your war cry, those words that came from God. In the army of the Lord let naught be heard but that one shout, God willeth it! God willeth it! We ordain not, and we advise not that the journey be undertaken by the old or the weak, or such as be not suited for arms, and let not women set out without their husbands or their brothers. Let the rich help the poor, nor priests nor clerks may go without the leave of their bishops, and no layman shall commence the march save with the blessing of his pastor. Whosoever hath a wish to enter upon this pilgrimage, let him wear upon his brow or his breast the cross of the Lord, and let him, who in accomplishment of his desire shall be willing to march away, place the cross behind him, between his shoulders, for thus he will fulfill the precept of the Lord who said, He that doth not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. The enthusiasm was general and contagious, as the first shout of the crowd had been, and the pious prelate, Adhémar, Bishop of Puy, was the first to receive the cross from the Pope's hands. It was of red cloth or silk, sewn upon the right shoulder of the coat or cloak, or fastened on the front of the helmet. The crowd dispersed to assume it, and spread it. End of section 109. This recording is in the public domain. Section 110 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine, read for LibriVox.org by Sonia. The Crusaders before Jerusalem, by Wilhelm von Kaulbach, Germany, 1805 to 1874. Painting, page 610. In the center of the picture, but far away, stand the temple domes of Jerusalem. Directly over this is a vision of the heavens, the Christ, the Virgin Mary, and a group of saints and martyrs. The arms of the Christ are extended as if to bless all those who are yet upon the earth, represented by a multitude of figures. Among them there is in the foreground Peter the Hermit, cross in hand. Near him are the psalmists and also penitents, some of whom are scourging themselves for their sins. At his left is Armida, with her knight Rinaldo, characters from Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered. Between them and Jerusalem are bishops, knights, and preachers, gazing eagerly at the holy city. On a hill at the right, Godfrey of Bouillon sits on a charger which is plainly wild and fiery, but now stands with head meekly bowed. Godfrey upholds in his hand the crown, which he offers to the Saviour as the real King of Jerusalem. Near him are many crusaders. The eyes of all are turned either upon Jerusalem or upon the vision in the clouds. The artist's idea was to express symbolically the thought that the religion of Christ has become the faith of the world. End of section 110. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 111 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World Story, Volume 2. India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine, edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 111. The Tearing Down of England's Flag, 1191. By Sir Walter Scott. Richard I of England had barely been crowned when he set off on a crusade. With him were Philip of France and Leopold of Austria. Jealousy of Richard soon arose, and the two princes abandoned him and sought their own domains. In the following story, Scott has pictured one of their disagreements. The Editor. The king was soon at the foot of St. George's Mount, the sides as well as platform of which were now surrounded and crowded, partly by those belonging to the Duke of Austria's retinue, who were celebrating with shouts of jubilee the act which they considered as an assertion of national honour, partly by bystanders of different nations, whom dislike to the English, or mere curiosity, had assembled together, to witness the end of these extraordinary proceedings. Through this disorderly troop Richard burst his way, like a goodly ship under full sail, which cleaves her forcible passage through the rolling billows, and heeds not that they unite after her passage and roar upon her stern. The summit of the eminence was a small level space on which were pitched the rival banners, surrounded still by the Archduke's friends and retinue. In the midst of the circle was Leopold himself, still contemplating with self-satisfaction the deed he had done, and still listening to the shouts of applause which his partisans bestowed with no sparing breath. While he was in this state of self-gratulation, Richard burst into the circle, attended indeed only by 2 men, but in his own headlong energies an irresistible host. "Who has dared," he said, laying hands upon the Austrian standard, and speaking in a voice like the sound which precedes an earthquake, "who has dared to place this paltry rag beside the banner of England?" The Archduke wanted not personal courage, and it was impossible he could hear this question without reply. Yet so much was he troubled and surprised by the unexpected arrival of Richard, and affected by the general awe inspired by his ardent and unyielding character, that the demand was twice repeated, in a tone which seemed to challenge heaven and earth, ere the Archduke replied with such firmness as he could command, "It was I, Leopold of Austria." "Then shall Leopold of Austria," replied Richard, "presently see the rate at which his banner and his pretensions are held by Richard of England." So saying, he pulled up the standard spear, splintered it to pieces, threw the banner itself on the ground, and placed his foot upon it. "Thus," said he, "I trample on the banner of Austria. Is there a knight among your Teutonic chivalry dare impeach my deed?" There was a momentary silence, but there are no braver men than the Germans. "I," and "I," and "I," was heard from several knights of the Duke's followers, and he himself added his voice to those which accepted the King of England's defiance. "Why do we dally thus?" said the Earl Wallenrode, a gigantic warrior from the frontiers of Hungary. "Brethren and noble gentlemen, this man's foot is on the honour of your country. Let us rescue it from violation, and down with the pride of England." So saying, he drew his sword, and struck at the King a blow which might have proved fatal had not the Scot intercepted and caught it upon his shield. "I have sworn," said King Richard, and his voice was heard above all the tumult which now waxed wild and loud, "never to strike one whose shoulder bears the cross. Therefore live, Wallenrode, but live to remember Richard of England." As he spoke, he grasped the tall Hungarian round the waist, and, unmatched in wrestling as in other military exercises, hurled him backwards with such violence that the mass flew as if discharged from a military engine, not only through the ring of spectators who witnessed the extraordinary scene, but over the edge of the mount itself, down the steep side of which Wallenrode rolled headlong, until, pitching at length upon his shoulder, he dislocated the bone, and lay like one dead. This almost supernatural display of strength did not encourage either the Duke or any of his followers to renew a personal contest so inauspiciously commenced. Those who stood farthest back did indeed clash their swords and cry out, "Cut the island mastiff to pieces!" But those who were nearer veiled perhaps their personal fears under an affected regard for order, and cried for the most part, "Peace! Peace! The peace of the cross! The peace of Holy Church and our Father the Pope!" These various cries of the assailants, contradicting each other, showed their irresolution, while Richard, his foot still on the archducal banner, glared round him with an eye that seemed to seek an enemy, and from which the angry nobles shrunk, appalled, as from the threatened grasp of a lion. Devorah and the Knight of the Leopard kept their places beside him, and though the swords which they held were still sheathed, it was plain that they were prompt to protect Richard's person to the very last, and their size and remarkable strength plainly showed the defence would be a desperate one. Salisbury and his attendants were also now drawing near, with bills and partisans brandished, and bows already bended. At this moment King Philip of France, attended by one or two of his nobles, came on the platform to inquire the cause of the disturbance, and made gestures of surprise at finding the King of England raised from his sick bed, and confronting their common ally, the Duke of Austria, in such a menacing and insulting posture. Richard himself blushed at being discovered by Philip, whose sagacity he respected as much as he disliked his person, in an attitude neither becoming his character as a monarch nor as a crusader, and it was observed that he withdrew his foot, as if accidentally, from the dishonoured banner, and exchanged his look of violent emotion for one of affected composure and indifference. Leopold also struggled to attain some degree of calmness, mortified as he was by having been seen by Philip in the act of passively submitting to the insults of the fiery King of England. Possessed of many of those royal qualities for which he was termed by his subjects the August, Philip might be termed the Ulysses, as Richard was indisputably the Achilles of the Crusade. The King of France was sagacious, wise, deliberate in council, steady and calm in action, seeing clearly and steadily pursuing the measures most for the interest of his kingdom, dignified and royal in his deportment, brave in person, but a politician rather than a warrior. The crusade would have been no choice of his own, but the spirit was contagious, and the expedition was enforced upon him by the Church, and by the unanimous wish of his nobility. In any other situation, or in a milder age, his character might have stood higher than that of the adventurous Coeur de Lion. But in the crusade itself, an undertaking wholly irrational, sound reason was the quality of all others least estimated, and the chivalric valour, which both the age and the enterprise demanded, was considered as debased if mingled with the least touch of discretion. So that the merit of Philip, compared with that of his haughty rivals, showed like the clear but minute flame of a lamp, placed near the glare of a huge blazing torch, which, not possessing half the utility, makes 10 times more impression on the eye. Philip felt his inferiority in public opinion, with the pain natural to a high-spirited prince, and it cannot be wondered at if he took such opportunities as offered for placing his own character in more advantageous contrast with that of his rival. The present seemed one of those occasions in which prudence and calmness might reasonably expect to triumph over obstinacy and impetuous violence. What means this unseemly broil betwixt the sworn brethren of the cross, the royal majesty of England, and the princely Duke Leopold? How is it possible that those who are the chiefs and pillars of this holy expedition— "A truce with thy remonstrance, France," said Richard, enraged inwardly at finding himself placed on a sort of equality with Leopold, yet not knowing how to resent it. "This Duke, or Prince, or pillar, if you will, hath been insolent, and I have chastised him. That is all. Here is a coil, forsooth, because of spurning a hound." "Majesty of France," said the Duke, "I appeal to you and every sovereign prince against the foul indignity which I have sustained. This King of England hath pulled down my banner, torn and trampled on it." "Because he had the audacity to plant it besides mine," said Richard. "My rank as thine equal entitled me," replied the Duke, emboldened by the presence of Philip. Assert such equality for thy person, said King Richard, and by St. George I will treat thy person as I did thy broidered kerchief there, fit but for the meanest use to which kerchief may be put. Nay, but patience, brother of England, said Philip, and I will presently show Austria that he is wrong in this matter. Do not think, noble Duke, he continued, that in permitting the standard of England to occupy the highest point in our camp, we the independent sovereigns of the Crusade acknowledge any inferiority to the royal Richard. It were inconsistent to think so, since even the oriflamme itself, the great banner of France, to which the royal Richard himself, in respect of his French possessions, is but a vassal, holds for the present an inferior place to the lions of England. But as sworn brethren of the cross, military pilgrims, who laying aside the pomp and pride of this world, are hewing with our swords the way to the Holy Sepulchre, I myself, and the other princes, have renounced to King Richard, from respect to his high renown and great feats of arms, that precedence which elsewhere and upon other motives would not have been yielded. I am satisfied that when your royal grace of Austria shall have considered this, you will express sorrow for having placed your banner on this spot, and that the royal majesty of England will then give satisfaction for the insult he has offered. The Spruchsprecher and the jester had both retired to a safe distance when matters seemed coming to blows, but returned when words, their own commodity, seemed again about to become the order of the day. The man of Proverbs was so delighted with Philip's politic speech that he clashed his baton at the conclusion by way of emphasis, and forgot the presence in which he was, so far as to say aloud, that he himself had never said a wiser thing in his life. It may be so, whispered Jonas Schwanker, but we shall be whipped if you speak so loud. The Duke answered sullenly that he would refer his quarrel to the General Council of the Crusade, a motion which Philip highly applauded as qualified to take away a scandal most harmful to Christendom. Richard, retaining the same careless attitude, listened to Philip until his oratory seemed exhausted, and then said aloud, I am drowsy. This fever hangs about me still. Brother of France, thou art acquainted with my humour, and that I have at all times but few words to spare. Know therefore at once I will submit a matter touching the honour of England neither to prince, pope, nor council. Here stands my banner. Whatsoever pennon shall be reared within 3 butts' length of it, I, were it the oriflamme, of which you were, I think, but now speaking, shall be treated as that dishonoured rag. Nor will I yield other satisfaction than that which these poor limbs can render in the lists to any bold challenge, I, were it against 5 champions instead of 1. Now, said the jester, whispering his companion, that is as complete a piece of folly as if I myself had said it. But yet I think there may be in this matter a greater fool than Richard yet. And who may that be? asked the man of wisdom. Philip, said the jester, or our own royal Duke, should either accept the challenge. But, O most sage Spruchsprecher, what excellent kings would thou and I have made, since on those whose heads these crowns have fallen can play the proverb-monger and the fool as completely as ourselves. While these worthies plied their offices apart, Philip answered calmly to the almost injurious defiance of Richard. I came not hither to awaken fresh quarrels, contrary to the oath we have sworn and the holy cause in which we have engaged. I part from my brother of England as brother should part, and the only strife between the lions of England and the lilies of France shall be which shall be carried deepest into the ranks of the infidels. It is a bargain, my royal brother, said Richard, stretching out his hand with all the frankness which belonged to his rash but generous disposition, and soon may we have the opportunity to try this gallant and fraternal wager. Let this noble Duke also partake in the friendship of this happy moment, said Philip, and the Duke approached half sullenly, half willing to enter into some accommodation. I think not of fools, nor of their folly, said Richard carelessly, and the Archduke, turning his back on him, withdrew from the ground. End of section 111. This recording is in the public domain.
Section number 112 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The World Story, Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 112, The Children's Crusade, 1212, by Eva March Tappan. A marvelous thing now came to pass, for the children of France and Germany went on a crusade. Stephen, a French shepherd boy 12 years old, declared that Jesus had appeared to him and bidden him lead a company of children to rescue the Holy Sepulchre from the infidels. Other children joined him, and they went about from village to village, bearing crosses and candles, swinging censers, singing hymns, and crying, "God wills it! God wills it!" Soon a great army of boys and girls, including the humblest shepherd lads and the children of wealthy nobles, started on a march for the Holy Land. No one could stop them. The king bade them return to their homes, but they only cried the more, "God wills it!" They broke away from their friends, from the very arms of their parents. The older folk knew not what to think. Some said this was a work of Satan to destroy the children. Others believed that it was the will of God, that where armed men had failed, innocent children should succeed, and they dared not hold them back, lest they should be fighting against God. In Germany, too, there was a boy preacher, one Nicholas, and he aroused the German children as Stephen aroused the French. The little German boys and girls set out, 20,000 strong, many of them wearing long gray coats upon which crosses were sewn. They had broad-brimmed hats, and they carried the staffs of pilgrims. As they marched, they sang hymns. One of these had come down to us. It begins, "Fairest Lord Jesus, ruler of all nature." But the way grew rougher and rougher. The air of the mountains was cold. They came to desert places where there was no food. Thousands died, and when the others reached the city of Genoa, they were only 7,000. Still the children did not lose courage. God would open a way for them through the sea, they believed, and soon they would be in the Holy Land. They would tell the story of the good Jesus. The infidels would listen and would become his followers. The morning came. They waited patiently on the shore at Genoa, but no path was opened through the sea. There is a tradition that part of the children sailed for Syria, but what became of them is not known. Some pressed on to Rome. They told the Pope about their journey and their sufferings. He said that it was of no use for them to try to reach Syria, but as they were bound by their vows, they must go on a crusade when they were older. By this time only a few children were left. Many had died, as had been said. Some had been stolen or sold as slaves, and still others had stopped in one place or another. Nothing now remained but to suffer the long, hard journey home, and at last this, too, had ended. "Tell us of your wanderings. Where have you been?" begged their parents and friends. But all that the tired little crusaders could answer was, "We do not know." Meanwhile, the French children, 30,000 in all, had set out for Marseilles. Their way was less rough, but the heat of the summer was terrible. Many of the little ones had never been further from their homes than some neighboring village, and whenever they came in sight of a city wall or a castle, they would ask piteously, "Isn't that Jerusalem?" After a journey of 300 miles, about 20,000 of them came to Marseilles. "Let us stay here tonight," they begged, "and tomorrow God will open a way for us through the sea." No path was opened, and many started to return to their homes. At length, 2 merchants offered to provide vessels for all who wished to go to the Holy Land. "We do it for the cause of God," they said, "and we ask no reward but your prayers." Then the children were happy. "This is the path through the sea," they cried joyfully. "This is what God promised us." 7 vessels full of the bravest of the children set sail to cross the blue Mediterranean. 18 years later, an old priest came to Europe and told the sad ending of the story. 2 of the 7 vessels had been wrecked, but the hundreds of children on board the others had been carried to the coast of Africa and sold to the Mohammedans as slaves. For the generous men of Marseilles, who had kindly offered to carry them across the sea, were slave traders. Of the 7 shiploads of children, not one ever saw his home again. End of section 112.
Section 113 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Read for LibriVox.org by Thomas Peter. The Children's Crusade, 1212, by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. What is this I read in history, full of marvel, full of mystery, difficult to understand? Is it fiction? Is it truth? Children in the flower of youth, heart in heart and hand in hand, ignorant of what helps or harms, without armor, without arms, journeying to the Holy Land. Who shall answer or divine? Never since the world was made, such a wonderful crusade started forth for Palestine. Never while the world shall last will it reproduce the past. Never will it see again such an army, such a band, over mountain, over main, journeying to the Holy Land. Like a shower of blossoms blown from the parent trees were they, like a flock of birds that fly through the unfrequented sky, holding nothing as their own, passed they into lands unknown, passed to suffer and to die. End of section 113. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 114 of India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. The World Story, Volume 2. India, Persia, Mesopotamia and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 114. Saint Louis as a Prisoner, 1250, by Joseph-François Michaud. In 1248, Louis IX of France, Saint Louis, went on a crusade. He invaded Egypt and captured Damietta, but was taken prisoner by the Mussulmans. The Editor. He, Louis, had no covering at night but a coarse cassock, which he owed to the charity of another prisoner. In this state he never addressed one petition to his enemies, nor did the tone of his language announce either fear or submission. One of his almoners afterwards attested upon oath that Louis never suffered a word of despair or a movement of impatience to escape from him. The Mussulmans were astonished at this resignation, and said among themselves that, if ever their prophet should leave them a prey to such great adversities, they would abandon his faith and his worship. Of all his riches, Louis had saved only his book of Psalms, too sterile a spoil to be worth the attention of the Saracens. And when all the world seemed to have abandoned him, this book alone consoled him in his misfortune. He every day recited those hymns of the prophets in which God himself speaks of his justice and his mercy, reassures virtue which suffers in his name, and threatens with his anger those whom prosperity intoxicates and who abuse their triumph. Thus religious sentiments and remembrances sustained the courage of Louis even in fetters, and the pious monarch, surrounded every day by fresh perils, amidst a Mussulman army that he had irritated by his victories, might still cry out with the Prophet King, "Supported by the living God, who is my buckler and my glory, I will not fear the crowd of enemies encamped around me." The Sultan of Cairo, appearing inclined to soften his rigorous policy, sent Louis 50 magnificent dresses for himself and the lords of his train. Louis refused to clothe himself in them, saying that he was the sovereign of a greater kingdom than Egypt, and that he would never wear the livery of a foreign prince. Almoadam ordered a great feast to be prepared, to which he invited the king, but Louis would not accept of this invitation, as he was persuaded it was meant only to exhibit him as a spectacle to the Mussulman army. At length the Sultan sent his most skilful physicians to him, and did all he could to preserve a prince whom he destined to adorn his triumph, and by whose means he hoped to obtain the advantages attached to his last victory. Before long he proposed to the king to break his chains upon condition of his giving up Damietta and the cities of Palestine that were still under the power of the Franks. Louis replied that the Christian cities of Palestine did not belong to him, that God had recently replaced Damietta in the hands of the Christians, and that no human power had the right to dispose of it. The Sultan, irritated by this refusal, resolved to employ violence. At one time he threatened Louis to send him to the Caliph of Baghdad, who would closely imprison him till death. At another, he announced the project of leading his illustrious captive throughout the East, and of exhibiting to all Asia a king of the Christians reduced to slavery. At length he went so far as to threaten to have him placed in the barnacles, a frightful punishment reserved for the greatest criminals. Louis still showed himself firm, and as the only reply to all these menaces, said, "I am the Sultan's prisoner. He can do with me what he pleases." The King of France suffered, though he did not complain. He feared nothing on his own account, but when he thought of his faithful army and of the fate of the other captives, his heart was a prey to the deepest sorrow. The Christian prisoners were crowded into one open court, some sick, others wounded, the greater part naked, and all exposed to hunger, the injuries of the elements, and the ill treatment of their pitiless guards. A Mussulman was commanded to write the names of all these wretched captives, whose number amounted to more than 10,000. They led all that could purchase their liberty into a vast tent. The others remained in the place into which they had been driven like a flock of animals, destined to perish miserably. Every day an emir, by the Sultan's orders, entered this abode of despair, and caused 200 or 300 prisoners to be dragged out of the enclosure. They were asked if they would abjure the religion of Christ, and those whom the fear of death induced to desert their faith received their liberty. The others were put to the sword, and their bodies were cast into the Nile. They were slaughtered during the night, silence and darkness adding to the horrors of the execution. During several days the steel of the executioner thus decimated the unhappy prisoners. None were ever seen to return who went out of the enclosure. Their sad companions, on bidding them farewell, wept beforehand over their tragical end, and lived in certain expectation of a similar fate. At length the lassitude of slaughter caused those that remained to be spared. They were led away to Cairo, and the capital of Egypt, into which they had flattered themselves they should enter in triumph, beheld them arrive covered with rags and loaded with chains. They were thrown into dungeons, where many died of hunger and grief. The others, condemned to slavery in a foreign land, deprived of all assistance and of all communication with their leaders, without knowing what was become of their king, were hopeless of ever recovering their liberty, or of revisiting the West. The Oriental historians relate the scenes we have just described with indifference. Many even seem to consider the massacre of prisoners of war as a second victory, and, as if the misfortune and murder of a disarmed enemy could heighten the glory of a conqueror, they exaggerate in their accounts the misery of the vanquished, and particularly the number of the victims immolated to Islamism. The barons and knights that were shut up in the pavilion were not ignorant of the fate of their companions in arms. They passed their days and nights in continual terrors. The Sultan wished to obtain from them that which he had not been able to obtain from Louis IX. He sent an emir to inform them that he would set them at liberty if Damietta and the Christian cities of Palestine were restored to the Mussulmans. The Count of Brittany replied, in the name of all the prisoners, that which was asked of them was not in their power, and that French warriors had no other will than that of their king. "It is plainly to be perceived," said the messenger of Almoadam, "that you care very little for liberty or life. You shall see some men accustomed to sword playing." The emir retired, leaving the prisoners in expectation of an early death. The apparatus of punishment was exhibited before them. The sword remained several days suspended over their heads, but Almoadam could make no impression upon their firmness. Thus neither the captivity of an entire army nor the death of so many warriors had been able to deprive the Christians of a single one of their conquests, and one of the bulwarks of Egypt was still in their hands. The conquerors prayed and threatened by turns, the conquered resisted all their endeavors, and always appeared masters. In the meantime several French nobles offered to pay their own ransom. Louis was informed of this, and as he feared that many, not having the means to redeem themselves, would remain in chains, he forbade any particular treaty. The barons and knights, but lately so intractable, did not persist in opposing the will of an unfortunate king, and instantly gave up all idea of a separate negotiation. The king said he would pay for everybody, and that he would never think about his own liberty till after he had assured that of all others. While the Sultan of Cairo was thus making useless attempts to overcome the pride and lower the courage of Louis and his knights, the favorites he had brought with him from Mesopotamia pressed their master to conclude the peace quickly. "You have," said they to him, "enemies much more dangerous than the Christians. They are the emirs who wish to reign in your place, and who never cease to boast of their victories, as if you had not yourself conquered the Franks, as if the God of Mahomet had not sent pestilence and famine to aid you in triumphing over the defenders of Christ. Hasten, then, to terminate the war, in order that you may strengthen your power within, and begin to reign." These speeches, which flattered the pride of Almoadam, induced him to make rather more reasonable proposals to his enemies. The Sultan limited his demand to a ransom of 1,000,000 of golden byzants, and the restitution of Damietta. Louis, aware that the city of Damietta could not resist, consented to the proposals that were made to him, if the queen approved of them. As the Mussulmans expressed some surprise at this, the king added, "The queen is my lady. I can do nothing without her consent." The ministers of the Sultan returned a second time, and told the French monarch that if the queen would pay the sum agreed upon, he should be free. "A king of France," answered he, "is not to be redeemed by money. The city of Damietta shall be given up for my deliverance, and 1,000,000 of golden byzants paid for that of my army." The Sultan agreed to all, and whether he was pleased at having terminated the negotiations, or whether he was touched by the noble character the captive monarch had displayed, he reduced the sum fixed upon as the ransom of the Christian army a fifth. The knights and barons were still ignorant of the conclusion of the treaty, and were revolving in their minds their customary melancholy reflections, when they saw an old Saracen enter their pavilion. His venerable figure and the gravity of his carriage inspired respect. His train, composed of men-at-arms, inspired fear. The old man, without any preliminary discourse, asked the prisoners by means of an interpreter if it was true that they believed in a God, born of a woman, crucified for the salvation of the human race, and resuscitated the third day. All having answered at once that that was their belief, "In that case," added he, "congratulate yourself at suffering for your God. You are yet far from having suffered as much for him as he suffered for you. Place your hopes in him, and if he has been able to recall himself to life, he will not want power to put an end to the evils that afflict you now." On finishing these words, the old Mussulman retired, leaving the Crusaders divided between surprise, fear, and hope. On the next day it was announced to them that the king had concluded a truce, and wished to take counsel of his barons. John of Valery, Philippe de Montfort, and Guy and Baldwin d'Ibelin were deputed to wait upon the king. It was not long before the Crusaders learned that their captivity was about to end, and that the king had paid the ransom of the poor as well as the rich. When these brave knights turned their thoughts towards their victories, they never could conceive how it was possible for them to have fallen into the hands of the infidels, and when they reflected on their late misfortunes, their deliverance appeared equally miraculous to them. All raised their voices in praises of God, and benedictions to the King of France. End of section 114. This recording is in the public domain. End of the World Story, A History of the World in Story, Song, and Art. Volume 2, India, Persia, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Edited by Eva March Tappan.